it would normally tell. So the topic, we called it Demystifying Organisational Development, or OD. And actually I spelled out OD the other day because just yesterday someone said, oh great, we've got an organisational design expert, which of course OD stands for. Now I would say that OD is different from, well, organisational development is not the same thing as organisational design. In my opinion, organisational design sits within organisational development. So OD, we're talking is organisational development, and we will look at definitions within this. So thank you for everybody who said your roles, and I'll come back. There's quite a few of you. I'm looking at where you're all from. That's really helpful, and I'll scan up and down it. Tell me if there's anything specific that you're interested in about the topic of OD. I can see that a lot of you have got OD in your job roles, which I guess is why you're interested in it. But what is it your business is trying to achieve through having someone with OD in their job role? Because you wouldn't have found that 15, 20 years ago, particularly. Probably I've said the NHS were one of the first places I actually saw people have organisational development in their job role. So just introducing myself. So my background, I've been in corporate learning and development roles, and actually, if I'm honest, they were organisational development roles a lot of the time, not called that though. I'm a chartered psychologist, so that is relevant in this context because I did my master's in occupational psychology, which is basically organisational development. So that's one of the things that I've always had an interest in. My day job is Actus. Some of you know that. So we have performance, talent and learning management software. I host the HR Uprising podcast. Actually, the third podcast I did was on the topic of organisational development, but I think I'm overdue to do another one because that's 3 years ago. So I will do an update. Change, I'm also very interested in change. That also fits within organisational development, and we've got lots and lots of podcasts and resources on these things, and my colleague Caitlin will send you out links to things like topic flyers. We've got them on organisational development and change and things like that, so you've got more resources easily for you to access. So that you know, Actus, our software, it's performance management software. It's also 360, compliance, learning management. Software in itself is just a system, right? And we'll look at where these things fit. But in actual fact, it can be an enabler of OD. You could look at any system, as we look later at a model, the O.D Burke-Litwin Model, that systems and software can be tools that could accelerate or affect or change organisational development. So they might fit into something. What's important as OD practitioners is how we make sure that the behaviours align around them and that we get the right results that we intended to from putting software in. So that's just an aside as to how something like a performance management software might fit in. Our other piece of software, Actus 360 Now, which is a standalone, this can be something useful for OD if you're looking to develop managers, or leaders. Let's say you want to bringing in certain types of behaviours or adapt the culture. You could have specific questions or surveys that you might use. So you might use something like this as OD tools within your toolkit. So flagging those just in this context. So those things are there for you if you are interested. Now, I'm just, sorry, a couple of questions. I'm going to put up, this is what I'm going to cover in this particular topic. But because I've got a few questions I've just seen come through, I'm just going to scan up here and see where we are. So there's just the one question that I just saw pop in. And do feel free to put questions in. If I miss them, put them in again. Sam just said, is occupational psychology a necessary qualification to be successful in OD? Absolutely not. The point of this is, I just did my first degree in psychology. I was very interested in it. This is just how my career has gone. The bit of psychology that I just happened to do my master's in was relevant. And there are things, if you wanted to go and do some study around OD, there is one course that I went on at Roffey Park. I quote from Roffey Park, which I remember just did a day on something there, which I thought was incredibly useful as a practitioner. So there are courses out there that I think are useful because OD can feel a little bit hard to define, and it's almost like you can easily feel out of your depth because it's very much aligned to an organisation. So it's not necessary at all, it's just useful. And it just happens that this is something that my background, how it fits into this. So I'll run through these in terms of the learning outcomes now. You can have a look through the content that we're intending to do. And what I'm going to do here is define organisational development. So normally I'd ask a question to you, but I can see there's someone just asked another question there. So actually the Roffey Park one, I would just go to Roffey Park's website, because it's a long time ago since I went on their course, so in case that's the question, but you can see the spelling of Roffey Park here. So just Google Roffey Park. They're a bit like Henley Business School or Cranfield. They're based down near Gatwick, and they're very much about organisational development. So if you want to go and look at that, go and see, they have stuff on the website I looked quite recently. So what would I define as organisational development? If someone said to you, what are you doing? Well, the CIPD call it a planned, systematic approach to enabling sustained organisational performance through the involvement of its people. And I would agree that that is OD. I think it's a bit narrow because it's not just about the involvement of the people, because it actually can encompass more structures and systems as well. But certainly people is a key part of it, and culture. Roffey Park talk to it about it's the work of facilitating organisational success by aligning the structural, cultural and strategic realities of work to respond to the needs of an ever-evolving business climate. So what they're very much talking about is responding to the external workplace. So that's also key, and I think you can combine the two. My shortened definition is about evolving, adapting or improving an organisation in line with strategic goals. And I guess that would incorporate people, culture, and the strategic goals would incorporate the external environment. So it is something that it's not just about looking narrowly down at, we need to put some training in place. It's about thinking, where are we trying to get as an organisation? And let's say we are an organisation that's got a new competitor in the marketplace. So what we need to do is compete against those people. So we might need to put in place some new skills for the salespeople to be able to position our product against that competitor. We might need to recruit some people who have different skills in line with that, and we may need to have some processes to design a product that competes differently. Now, process and system design, I would say, is slightly outside of OD. It goes into more about, there's more complex things where you go very producty. It is predominantly about people and culture, organisational development, but you would sit alongside systems improvement, etc. as well. So one of the things here, most of you, from what I've seen, are in HR or learning and development, people services. That's the sort of thing that I'm seeing here. What, in your opinion, where do you think organisational development should sit? Should it sit within HR, learning? Is it learning development? Is it skill that people have? Should it sit separately in business improvement? If you're a big organisation that's got that sort of thing, where or how do you think organisational fits? So Katie's saying she thinks business development. Do you mean, what do you mean by business development? Because sometimes business development for some people is external sales. Do you mean internal business development, Katie? Yeah, got you. So more of an internal, it's an internal improvement function, but being familiar with things. Yes, I think that, Nudge, as well. So, so Nudge just said HR should sit in organisational development. And so it's Louis saying we have a workforce development service, and underneath it sits organisational development, learning and development, and people and payroll. So what do people and payroll do? Is that classical HR, Libby? Is that sort of things? So Kate's saying it should be more about transformation, strategic partnering. Absolutely. Yeah, Erica, maybe you're right. Absolutely. Should it sit everywhere, systemically in all sections of the organisation? So yes, it's HR, so it's just brought in-house. Great, okay. Yeah, Glenn, I like that. Independent, so it responds to all services and data, not just HR. So the reality is, where there isn't a right answer, honestly, but where I typically see it, I typically see in organisations that someone has an OD, like Libby's saying, which would probably have an overarching HR service, and organisational sits underneath it. Like Nudge, I actually personally think that organisational development should maybe sit above, and then HR services, learning and development, things like business transformation, change, depending on the size of the organisation. Obviously, this is a larger organisation, with there, and having that level of independence so that you could get involved if it is something which is a system or process. It's the real key about it is that OD is a strategic role. I think that's the key. It's not a purely tactical role. And depending on how an organisation and how the HR leadership is in an organisation, putting it underneath HR could make it seem like something you just do. It's tactical, whereas actually it should be it's all encompassing. It weaves in and out of all these things. So it's definitely something for us to think strategically, and we know that's one of the things that as HR, if you're in HR, that we all need to develop in terms of thinking strategically. And thinking strategically to me is meaning that we're looking to the future, we're looking outside of classical problems that we just want to fix in the organisation. We're looking to the problems of the future, the challenges of the future, the aspirations of the future. We're looking to the business strategy, and we're aligning the people, policies, processes, activities, change activities with that, so that it all joins up with where we want to go, as opposed to fixing things related to where we are now. The sort of topics that you might think fit into it, and this is not the be all and end all, there are more to this, but these are the sort of things that may fit in. So organisational development, yes, absolutely. So if you've got things like workforce design and things like that, that is an OD topic, because it stands to reason you need to align your structures and your workforce in line with where you want to go. So, you know, where we have organisational restructures, basically that's OD, and it should usually it will be done for a variety of purposes, which will be external. It could be something to do with cost cutting, but that cost cutting would probably be generated by a shift in demand for a product, or shift in revenues, or a need to save costs, or a need to be more lean and aligned. So there'll be an external driver of it. If you're doing something to do with leadership and management systems and processes, so leadership management systems process, sorry, those are separate. So if you're developing anything to do with leaders or management behaviours or culture, or if you're looking at the systems and processes that feed into those, so it might be a new competency framework which you're trying to develop certain types of behaviours. It might be a performance related pay process, something where you need people to behave. It could be a performance management process. So that would fit in something which is organisational development. And actually, that's an interesting one. If I take performance management, because obviously we're in that space, if you're putting in a performance management process and or system, and you're doing it because you want to create a high performance culture, that's more of an organisational development topic. If you're doing it because you want to get rid of paper, then that's much more of a transactional thing. And you should always want to be thinking, it's always a strategic, what's the purpose of doing something that's bigger than just removing more tactical pain points? And that links into culture and change. So are we thinking about what's the culture of the future? What culture we want to drive? OD going on, driven by coronavirus, driven by the pandemic. So lots of us have got different hybrid working environments, and culture change has taken place, forced by the external environment. If we're trying to encourage continuous improvement, a learning culture, then that would fit into an OD. So again, in terms of something that's an ongoing style, as opposed to just meeting here and now training needs. Evidence-based, that's something we should all be looking to do. We know that as HR professionals are often talked about, that that's very much about looking at what the evidence is and what do we need to shift, and checking the evidence, and having that evidence-based practice is really key to make sure we're only putting in place OD projects that fit, which we believe fit with what the evidence is telling us we need. And then strategic talent management, the difference between that is sometimes people call talent management, it could be people management, it could be recruitment, it could be quite narrow, just responding to a gap. But strategic talent management might be as looking to the future and saying, actually, we know that in 5 years' time, all of the people with the key skills that we've got in this area will be retiring because of the age of our workforce. We need to actually look strategically at mentoring, at developing people, retaining people with those key skills. We need to put in a whole set of interventions to make sure that we don't lose key skills from the business. So people with those talents are kept in the business. So that's much more of a strategic talent management, as opposed to recruiting to fill gaps from people who've just chosen to leave. I suppose you could say strategic talent management would be defining why people are leaving our business and changing whatever it is that's causing them to leave. Let's say we identify that we've got a gap in management skills, so then it feeds in together. So I think hopefully that makes sense. Those are topics you might hear, But making them OD topics is about making them more strategic, where we think about a bigger picture impact that they're having. Tell me in the chat if that made sense. And actually, if you've got any questions that feed off of that, I will keep going, but just tell me in the chat, because I'm conscious that there's quite a lot of explanation in this set of slides. Is there anything that's missed? Thanks, Noma. Is there anything that you think's missed from that topic that you think fits into OD in your organisation? So I've got some, by the way, we will send you these slides. I've got examples here of OD that you can read through here because they're quite wordy, but they're similar to the sort of things that I was explaining there. So it's about change, but it could be change in structure, culture, strategy, or process. It could be at an individual level. Now, this is Roffey Park through to an entire organisation. So it could be a change, but you wouldn't sort of say, oh, I've changed the job description of Fred, and that's OD necessarily. You'd need to look at actually this particular role is no longer suitable for where we're trying to go. So we need to shift the skill set of the people in this area. Let's say marketing. We might go, all of the, old style marketing doesn't work, or we've got outbound people on phones, no one answers a phone anymore. So we need to change the skill set of these people in this business development role and give them a digital skill set. And they need to be able to email effectively or utilize different digital skills in order to generate leads. So it's thinking about why we're doing something. Behavioral science is basically psychology. So it's just looking at the idea of OD is looking at theories, and we'll do this in HR. The e-PDR have really become much bigger on behavioral science and being more evidence-based. So it's about looking at what the evidence might be and thinking about how can we use this to facilitate transformation. It's about helping people to be involved, so involving people to make sure that they lead change, take change with them. And some of that is about making change sustainable, not doing change to people. If we involve the organisation in delivering and defining and delivering change, it's much more likely to be real and sustainable. So a lot of it's about change there in terms of OD. So those examples have come from Roffey Park, and I'm just illustrating them further. I've got further examples as we go through it. This is so simple. It's so simple. It's very basic. But you know what? It's actually harder to do than you realise. But you're probably doing OD and you don't realise it. So this is the key. So if you've got an example where you think, do you know what? I need to do an OD intervention in terms of this, then you could think about how you are really in touch with the business in things. But you need to start off with knowing why you're doing something. It's not about just launching in. So you need to really have your finger on the pulse of the business. You want to have that relationship. One of the key things, if you want to be involved in OD, is because it's more strategic, it's a really good opportunity for you to get to understand the roles of the senior manager of the business. So some of you may already be in senior HR or OD roles, but if you're not, it's a good opportunity for you to make sure you're close to the business, because you can't do OD unless you understand what the big challenges are that's keeping the board, the executive team awake at night. So you might see that, and I'll show you more when I go through this Burke-Litwin model. So you might identify that people are complaining that there's a certain lack of skill in the business. You're hearing that the sales director has got a problem with the skills in the business, that people are losing deals to a certain competitor. Or you might hear that you've got an issue in terms of people haven't got commercial awareness, or they're not able to resource plan for whatever reason, whatever the different, I know there's so many different types of organisation and industry on here. You might anecdotally hear, and this can be evidence that there are problems in the business which relate to people, culture, workforce. Often what happens is that these people come to you and say, oh, we need to hire people, or we need a training course, which is very tactical, but you need to not get sucked into that. You need to go back and say, what are the actual needs and how does this fit the business strategy? Why is this important? Then you might think, okay, I do think a training course or a recruitment drive is going to be the way to address these needs, or a culture change project. But you might want to involve people further. So you might select an intervention. So let's say you want to do a culture change project where we want to encourage more meaningful management behaviours. So often what you might have there is you decide you're going to go and consult with others. So you might select a series of interventions or an intervention, which might be going out to people and doing focus groups, redefining the values and vision, involving people in world cafes, any of these sort of tools, talk to people about what they want. So you might select your intervention or series of interventions that you think will help address these needs. And number 3 in fairness is big, right? So it's your plan. You put the plan in place, you start to do it, and then the key is you need to put in that reflection time and evaluate, did it achieve impact? One of the challenges we often have with change programs is they just keep going and going and going. They have massive scope creep, and so we never actually stop and realize that we've consolidated that change or embedded it. So that's why it's a 5-step program. It's very simple, it's very common sense there. But essentially making sure that you do understand what the issue is with examples and evidence, not just hearsay, gather other evidence, that there's a problem, there actually is a problem. Think of ways in which you can solve it, suggest those ways, define a series of interventions, put them in place, and then make sure you have got a time to evaluate the impact. And you know what, if it's not working, try something different, but just keep following that loop around. Sort of things that I mentioned some great jargon here. How many of you have used any of these things here or are familiar with these terms that you might see? But I think all of these could fit into organisational development. So you've got things like being aware of the complexity of an organisation, lean. Right, so this is level 5C, so this is familiar terms, but sometimes is it theoretical or have you managed to put it into practice, Katie? Because I think that's the other thing, it can feel quite theoretical, this sort of thing. Good stuff. Can you put some in 10? So these are some of the tools that people use, but sometimes it's knowing how to use it. And I think sharing with everybody else is a really helpful way. Have any of you come across the Burke-Litwin model? She's in here in orange here. Anyone come across this in any of your studies? You have, Chris. How did you come? Have you used it, Chris? So this is actually, I came across this the first time when I went to undid a Roffey Park course, and this is about 20 years ago, but I still think it's really useful, and I applied it in the business I was working in at the time. So I'm going to share it with you at a high level. So this model, it was from 1992, it was developed, and it's a leadership change / performance model. The idea is it's about diagnosing organizational effectiveness, and it's designed to be used almost as a diagnostic OD instrument, where you look at all of these areas and it helps you see where you might need to make changes, where the drivers for change are. And what this where this model works, and actually you can see, sorry, I've got to get my cursor in the right place, is it's basically saying that most things are driven by the external environment. Now, critics of the theory say that it's too externally focused, but to be honest, I think you can start anywhere in here. And it's relevant. You don't have to use all of them, but essentially the theory here is that it's top down in terms of the most importance of driving the change in terms of that. So you might see, if we just thought very easily about what's recently happened, we've just had a pandemic, or could argue we're still slightly in a pandemic, and that drove some massive changes. Now, down the left-hand side are the sort of hard areas of mission and strategy, organisational structure, etc. And to the right-hand side, they're sort of slightly more intangible type things. So in terms of keeping this model clean, you'd have lots of arrows here. All of these would have little arrowheads. So everything influences each other. Everything can influence and knock on to each other. But from a point of view of a tool, if I was using this myself and reflecting on, or even at the start of the pandemic, going, okay, we've got a pandemic, we're going to, what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to change the way we work, actually. We're actually going to have to change our organisational structure. And that's a bit further down there, but we're kind of thinking about how that's a knock on there. But in the initial piece was, what are we going to do to still perform in this environment? We needed to consider the culture of the organisation. Are people going to be able to move in a hybrid way to go and, well, many of us have now got hybrid cultures. Can they work from home? Or is it something where, some organizations, you remember the very early stages of going to work from home, that some people were completely in denial that people didn't have to just come into the office. That said quite a lot about their organizational culture and the behaviors of their leaders. And those things would feed in and out of each other. So you probably got some command and control leaders with an organizational culture. I would then predict if you've got a command and control type approach, you probably got less of an empowered and trusting culture, which would make it quite hard. So your management practices are probably going to be much more breathing down people's necks, not trusting people to get on with things, micromanagement type style. And that could then create a work climate where people don't feel trusted, they feel stressed. That might negatively affect their motivation, their values, etc. So there's things there. You can see a flow down that diagram, how that would maybe all knock on. It may or may not affect the organizational structure at that time. But then when we come to maybe where we are right now in terms of the sort of things that would have then gone as we're sort of midway through it, I say, do you know what, we need some different systems and policies. Well, we had things like furlough, we would have had home working policies. We've got businesses now that are changing the way that people work in terms of, do you come in certain days of the week? Almost though the sort of work climate of what was acceptable during that time, it was perfectly acceptable for your cat or your small child to appear on screen while you were working a certain way. Has it then resulted in feeding back up here to a slightly different mission and strategy for organizations? Have they realized that the external environment has changed to such an extent that we need a different product strategy, that maybe people are buying in different ways? We're seeing, if we were an events organization, don't think events have gone back to where they were. So if I was an events company, I'd need to change my strategy, think about how we grow. I might have had to downsize my organization. So all of these things would perhaps be things where you can see, if you were standing back, you go, well, if we're going to plan the change, we're planning for a pandemic, and this is what the impact's going to be. You could plan those things. The reality is we reacted. So you can actually put all of these in place. That's something that was thrust upon everybody. But you could look at your organization in the light of, there's going to be again, lots I keep thinking NHS there, and NHS has changed thrust upon them a bit too much. If you looked at something where there's going to be a big opportunity for your business to invest in, let's say you're in a growth market, and you're early to market, then what kind of leadership do you need? What kind of mission and strategy? What kind of management practices? What kind of culture? So it's all about defining that culture. And you think about things like cultural web. There's other management models that you'll come across that you could map into these. So there's tools I've talked about on other webinars and on podcasts about culture. So you could do some diagnosis of your culture. And let's just say there's a big opportunity. You might diagnose your culture as being a little bit slow to move. And actually what you need to do is you need to make sure that people are more forward thinking, more sales oriented, and we need to put in different, quicker activities in our organization to grasp this opportunity of the external environment. So I'm kind of talking around this in a way that what you'd actually do if you wanted to use a tool like this is look at it and just ask yourself questions in relation to each of these. And you might almost go, where are we currently? So an as is set of questions. And if we look at the external environment, the opportunity, where do we want or need to be in relation to that? And what you'll find is what will spill out of this is areas where you want to make change. And where you want to make change, then you can think about, okay, how are we going to get that? How are we going to put that in place? How do we make that different management practice put in place? Is it about training? Is it about competencies, etc.? So Katie, let me see the question here. So Katie's saying, if I said the external environment is coronavirus and go to the purple section, you can work it out. Is it working down? Yes, it will work down. If you look back at it, yeah, you probably could apply that to your own organization sort of view. Think whatever happened for you, which would vary based on the organization. And then think, so what was the impact as you went down? Where are we currently? Have you fundamentally got different expectations further down? Because it was ultimately a change that was imposed on most of us, and these things will have fed through. So you could look back, and if you looked back 3 years ago at your organisation, in each of these areas and where you are now, you'll probably see that change has happened in quite a lot of them. The theory of this is that Burke-Litwin believes that environmental factors are the most important drivers for change. They're not the only ones. You could start by getting a new set of leaders or a new mission and vision, but the reality is it's got to be aligned with the external environment, probably. Otherwise, the likelihood is you're kind of pushing against the tide, if you know what I mean. So it does need to make sense that it links. A strategy needs to link to the external environment. Otherwise, it's going to be less successful. So do feel free if anyone's got any questions then, you can go and Google this and look more about it. But I think this is a reasonable diagnostic. It's got most of the topics that you would want to ask questions about that would fit because it shows how everything's joined up. Because if someone said, oh, do you know what, we just want to do some values, we want to make sure everybody's living the values, we need to think, okay, so actually, have we got the right environment for values? What's our current culture? Have we got policies and systems in place that are driving the right behaviours? So if you've got a very tight performance culture where people get rated and it's competitive, then that's going to encourage a culture of competitiveness, and people are not going to necessarily feel valued relative to their, as individuals. So thinking about the knock-on of any of these things, how they all interrelate, and fundamentally a change anywhere in the system is likely to knock on somewhere else. And this just gives you a useful way of looking at it, because you can generally go, oh yeah, I can see how that would affect there and that would affect there. Everything is connected, is really the connection, is the message with this. One more slide that I thought was useful, and I alluded to this earlier, is the distinguishing between what I would classify as OD work and HR and L&D work. Neither is superior, but it's just helping us think, have I got my OD hat on, or am I being more HR, L&D and more tactical, so we can keep it in place? And it really is, it's about that slightly bigger picture of things. So if you are helping to diagnose and define the skills that are needed to support business strategy, so we're saying this is where we're going as a business, what are the skills that we need to support it, then that would be more OD. You're diagnosing and defining something. But then putting it into action, that's where you need the recruitment team to recruit people with these skills. So you've diagnosed the missing skills, now we need to recruit people with those right skills. If you're doing a new definition of values project where we need to go and define our values, we want a fresh set of values or competencies, or we're looking at what our strategic goals need to be. So if you're helping those to be defined, facilitating them, possibly defining them, that's one aspect of OD, but then actually making sure that they're put in place and people have goals aligned to them. So putting it into making it reality is more HR and OD. Definition, again, if you read down them, they're all sort of definition and sort of implementation. So defining it. So this is where you're saying OD is taking a step back, thinking, where do we need to go, defining what it is we need to do, but then we need to do it. And so that's where more of our sort of day-to-day HR L&D hats are really, really important. If we looked at something like defining a competency or skills framework, well, that's all brilliant OD stuff to do, but if we don't do anything with it, it's useless. So they're both really important. So you then, once you've defined it, you're doing it in order to work out what skills have we got in the organisation. Now, interesting, that particular one could loop back round. So what skills we've got in the organisation, that could then go to be a training needs analysis, or it could be, go back and define, well, what skills do we need instead? So it's kind of looping. So, in HR or learning and development, we have OD hats. We have part of our role should be OD, but it's making sure that we don't get too stuck in one side or the other. So I'm looking at some questions here. Is OD role seen as high up in an HR role? I don't think it is in the real world. I don't think OD is well understood in organisations at senior levels. That's my opinion. I'm very interested in anyone else's opinion. If people want to read the chat. So Katie said, is an OD seen as higher up than an HR role? Generally, HR is seen as top of the tree traditionally. However, if you looked at where CIPD and people say HR need to have more OD, and if you look at the criticisms levelled at HR are criticised for not being strategic enough. And that's really, you need to have an OD hat on to be seen as strategic. okay, I'll come back to that on Katie. I think in fact, there's probably people here can explain that. There's training in CIPD. I mean, someone further up has said they've done some OD. It would be part of the level 5, and then level 7 is higher, isn't it, in CIPD? If someone can advise, oh, it was yourself, Katie, there. Yes, I think so, Lauren. Can the person be one and the same? Yes, definitely. So I have been that person. I have had both in place. The challenge is being able to pull yourself out of the detail, is being able to pull back up, because you can get very stuck in the day-to-day. So the challenge really is being able to move from big picture helicopter view down to detail and then back up again. And different personalities have different strengths in those areas. So you can read through these, and these are my final summary points here. So if we want to be more OD focused ourselves, then what I would say is do keep an eye on whether your operational activities are serving the future vision. Make sure you don't end up just doing things for the sake of it. Our world is moving so quickly all the time, and this is why I think it's so important, OD, at the moment, because we've always got to have an eye on where we're trying to go. Are we going the right direction? Are the behaviours that we are engendering and reinforcing, are they serving where we're trying to go as an organisation? Balancing short-term requirements with long-term benefits. Remember, people will always come to you. I've been in learning development. People would come to you and say, oh, I need this training course. People need time management training course. And they go, okay, so tell me what the problem is. And you actually understand that they don't really need time management training course. They actually probably have got resource problem where they've got people in the wrong job, or they've recruited that they've got many people doing, they've got the wrong systems or processes. There's a bigger problem as to why people are too busy. So diagnosing the problem properly and making sure it's just not tactical things, put people on a training course doesn't fix things. It's got to be part of an overall plan. Try to always connect all things to business strategy. Make sure you understand the business strategy. Make this an opportunity to go and talk to the senior managers in your organisation. Where are they trying to go? Hopefully they know. They don't always. So ask those questions about where are we trying to go, even if you have to coach upwards. Explain to people why we're doing something. So help people understand why we've got to have a culture of something. And just really be systematic as well. So once you have that vision, think about how you can don't get so bogged down in all the things you can do. So you have the bigger vision, but then take a chunk of it. So if you went back to that Burke-Litwin model and said, okay, overall, this is where we need to go. We do want to do culture change, but you know what? We're going to start by working with our leaders, because that's the area we can do. So choose an area and complete that, knowing that that will knock on in the other areas. So coaching upwards, Katie, what I mean by that is sometimes with the leaders in your organisation, you might have to go and ask open questions and say, okay, where is it we think we're going? Oh, what do you think we'd need to do? What do you think the people priorities are for us to achieve the business strategy? Might it be helpful if we were to clarify the strategic goals so that everybody in the organisation is clear where we're going and we can be more effective? It's asking things as questions upwards. Okay, so don't worry guys, we've pretty much finished and I'll send you the recording anyway. So any other questions, I'll leave the chat here and I'll happily stay on to answer any other questions. Caitlin will send this out to you. Actually, let me just pop, if there's anyone wants us to follow up in any of these, I've just got a poll which makes it easy for us to follow up on. There isn't consultancy on there, we do offer that as well. But if you want us to follow up on any of the things we've talked about, you'll get links to these. I'm taking a break for August, but I'll be doing the topics onboarding and then mentoring next year, in terms of next academic year, I guess it is, isn't it? And these are our training programs that we run internally or externally. Management Essentials, Change Superhero, they're all virtual. Impact and Influence is a new one that's really turned out to be very popular for those people who've joined organisations recently and don't actually have any experience of working in offices actually. So any of those, hopefully keep an eye out. We will send out flyers when they're happening. Other links here, there's, if you want to do more on change, there's the free change toolkit. There's lots and lots of resources that we'll signpost you to. So thank you very much for joining. Appreciate the questions in the chat. Apologies if I didn't get to something, do please feel free. And oh, that's great, who's just shared that, the pathway for OD, that's really helpful by further up there. Pop any questions in if you need to. what's this? So Lauren has just put as the senior mentor. Okay, the CIPD there. That's a good link for. There's lots of places you can go to. Okay, so Judith's saying, can I share a little bit on developing talent and retention strategy over the HR action? Judith, are you talking about this slide here? Was it one here or just more generally? Oh, this you are. You're talking about this one. What was I meaning here? Let me have a look. Okay, so if we took, I'll just take that example that I used earlier, because actually this is a real example that I had, and I used to work for Siemens, and they had some legacy systems that only certain people knew how to work, but there were lots and lots of customers who still used them. And as these engineers were retiring, it was getting harder and harder to service the space, but it was worth lots of money. So strategically, we needed to retain people who were hitting 65. So that was a sort of a strategy as to that we defined that was a problem. We defined how can we do that, and we thought, well, we can do this by remunerating them to stay on later, by talking to them about would they like to go part-time, so different types, back then a bit more flexible to allow people to go part-time, allowing them to be mentors, setting in place ways which they were transferring knowledge ahead of retirement. So those are the strategies. But then monitoring it. So are we losing people in certain areas? Are they taking up on the development that we're putting in place? So the sort of the managing of whether it was working or not went into either learning and development or into HR. How did we get to the decision that we need to take that cohort on? It was a business risk. So the business that I worked for, they could see that as they were looking forward, that a large chunk, so it's all about money, a large chunk of their revenue was servicing products by engineers which had fewer and fewer of those people, which were old skills. So it was obvious that, you know, that these skills were becoming harder and harder. So it was we were getting slower at responding to those customers because we had fewer people with those skills, and that problem was obviously going to increase because all of those people were of a certain age. So that's how we got to that decision, is as we were looking forwards, how do we retain, the business was thinking, how do we retain this big chunk of money, which is our managed service base, or our base of revenue, and that was and therefore what's the risk? Well, the reason we might not keep it is we can't service it. So that's how it is. So it's very much about being connected with the bigger picture of where the business is going in terms of how they make money, which is fundamentally what it's about, or deliver whatever service it is that your business or organisation is there to deliver. So hopefully that's answered the question for you, guys, and yeah, feel free to answer further questions or stay in touch. So I think we've probably covered everything. Thank you so much for joining.